Very well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. I'm really, really happy to have you. And as I said, you're living in one of my favorite cities on earth. You're working for Evonik. You're leading the project Tissue Engineering, which is really, really interesting. So there will be a lot of different topics to talk about. But first, let's talk about food engineering at the Entrepreneur's Kitchen. What will you be preparing?
Today, there's a challenge with 3 ingredients per se, and then making it somehow personal or giving it a twist. So I decided to make a granola, self-made granola, to cut down the sugar and do it a little bit more healthy. So I have nuts, I have oats, and then, of course, a little bit sweet it has to be, so a little bit of maple syrup. I decided to go with maple syrup today.
Oh, I love it. So this is going to be your afternoon snack, or are you going to just have it maybe tomorrow morning?
So usually I eat it with my yogurt.
Okay.
So early in the morning, my breakfast is yogurt, self-made yogurt, which is pretty easy to do in Singapore because of the temperature. And then just having the granola.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you not only look like a fitness coach, you also eat like a fitness coach. And from our the small conversation before going into the show, I realized, and you talked about it, that you are almost like a fitness freak. So let's talk about that part, because I find it so fascinating. And if you can give any tips, I'm totally open before going into engineering topics. So how do you engineer your body?
So it all started for me like almost 3 years ago, when Evonik opened a new gym on the site in Marl, where I was working back at that time. And then started getting into that fitness, and I was not obese, but a little bit chubby. And then started to work out in the gym, really enjoyed it, and somehow got onto that fitness journey. And then throughout 6 months, I lost 13 kilograms. And then since then, started to build up some muscle mass, got into various different sports recently. CrossFit, and during the lockdown here in Singapore, it's called circuit breaker, I started cycling. And it's quite fun to cycle around a whole country within less than 6 hours. So last weekend I had a trip around the entire island, which is 130 kilometers. Did that on a Sunday morning, which was nice.
That's really awesome. I mean, I find Singapore so fascinating. Before asking you questions also about Singapore life as a German expat living there, let me introduce what I'm going to be doing, because I haven't had my breakfast yet. So this is going to be a Turkish breakfast plate with 1 egg, some feta cheese, and tomatoes. So
nice.
Yeah, have you ever been to Turkey? This is all what we eat in the morning, and some people will add, olives as well. So if you want to, but that would be the 4th ingredient. So I'm leaving it out.
No, unfortunately, I haven't been to Turkey yet.
Okay. Well, that can change. So living in Singapore, Alexander, how does it affect your work, and what are some differences in your area of expertise, things you can do there which are problematic, for instance, in Germany, and also the environment?
Yeah, it's totally different to the environment in Germany. So I last lived in Düsseldorf, working in Marl, in the Evonik site there. And then coming to Singapore, the first thing you recognize, and you know it as you've been here already, is the temperature and the humidity. You get out of the airplane, Changi Airport, which is one of the greatest airports I know, and then you get out of this aircon cooled down airport, and then it smashes you in your face. You start to sweat immediately, and then that's definitely a big change.
Like you go grab a plate, yeah.
Commuting to work, getting to work, you have to expect to be already sweating when you arrive in the office. And then everything is cooled down. The room temperature usually is quite low, so you have to have something with you to cover. Other than that, it's a very vibrant, awesome place to live in and to work in. The people are motivated. They are very open to help. It's solution oriented, and I really appreciate to be in here and have the opportunity to be here and to work in this country, and to have set up this project house was just amazing and is amazing. So I'm here now since 2 years, and I really enjoy being here.
Yeah, as I said, I'm totally
Regarding
jealous.
the second part of the question,
Yes.
whether there's something that we can do here that we couldn't do somewhere else. Yes, but we don't do. So to a certain extent in Singapore, it would be allowed to work with embryonic stem cells, but for ethical reasons and also for technical reasons, we're not working with embryonic stem cells, and we don't have the intention to work with that. But the main purpose, or the main strength in Singapore is the network, is the excellent access to talents, the IP security we are having here. Being in the middle of Asia and having access to the Asian market is definitely one of the strengths of Singapore.
And you were also referring in our call beforehand that even if you were to...
I can't hear you right now, so maybe I talk a little bit more about tissue engineering.
Yes. Well,
I don't know whether everybody is familiar with tissue engineering. So you might wonder what Evonik is doing in the field of tissue engineering, and what is tissue engineering about. So tissue engineering is a subsection of regenerative medicine, or medicine in general. And in this field, researcher and medicine try to cultivate human cells on a scaffold in order to create a organ, or a full organ, or an organoid, in order to treat certain diseases. And in that field, there's still a lack of reliable material and scalable material. Very often, the sources of the materials are animal-based, and we are a chemical company. We are not a pharma company, yet we are very active in the healthcare space. So we understand the needs, and therefore we are now developing materials for tissue engineering. So we're working on scaffold materials that are biodegradable, where cells can grow on the surfaces, and yet being clearly defined by the chemistry, and can be scaled with avoiding animal sources.
Can you hear me now?
No, can still
not.
Can still.
Oh, okay. Wait. So we just fixed the connection problem, hopefully. So now you can hear me, right?
Yes, now I can hear you again.
Perfect. Yeah, well, I'm really grateful that you started talking about this field of tissue engineering, because that was going to be my next question. But beforehand, you also mentioned that even if you were to work on certain, like embryonic research and things like that, there is not a market for that kind of research in the world. The market is really small, and it doesn't really make sense. So I just wanted to emphasize that for the people who are watching, that even if you can do certain things, it doesn't mean that you have to do them. And even if you do them, it doesn't mean that you can sell them, because other people don't want them. So so obviously
there's actually a third component to that. We even think that there's not even a technical necessity to work with embryonic stem cells. There's something called induced pluripotent stem cells. Very complicated, but basically you extract cells and reprogram that into stem cells. So you can do extract cells from a human, from a patient, from a healthy person, whatever you're looking for, and then transfer these cells into a stem cell again, and use the stem cell. So, and they're quite potent. And then from those cells, you can derive them into different new cells. And therefore, in our perspective, there is no real technical need to work with embryonic stem cells.
That is really awesome. Let's go back to tissue engineering. So what are some of the fields where you can use tissue engineering, where you need to use tissue engineering? And do you see the end coming of the point where it's actually going to be affordable too?
Yeah, so there's multiple applications that are possible and that we have in mind. You can think of treating diseases, like working on pancreas cells in order to treat diabetes. You can think of burn victims that have large parts of their body being burned, and then working on skin coming out of the lab as a transplant for those patients to reduce their pain, to reduce the scar formation. We can think of chronic wounds, for example, coming from diabetes, wounds that don't close, that don't heal. They are humid, they're wet, they stink. It's very uncomfortable for the patients because it hurts, it's embarrassing. And giving those people living quality back is one thing that we see in tissue engineering as a part of regenerative medicine. So rather than treating the symptoms, it's treating the disease itself and reducing that.
And with tissue,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. And with tissue engineering, you can make sure that these wounds won't come back.
There is early studies. So the field is still very new, and there's a lot of clinical studies going on, and there's not many applications that are registered yet. And to our belief, this is partly because of the lack of reliable materials to work on. Because if you're working on a completely new treatment therapy in the medical space, you have to go through the clinical studies to prove that, first of all, the therapy does what it's supposed to do. And then on top of that, also doesn't have any side effects, negative side effects. And in tissue engineering, you start with the scaffold material, you place the cells on it, and then you add cell culture media, which is basically the food for the cells. And then the cells grow and form the tissue. Now, if you work with animal-derived materials, that underlies lot-to-lot variabilities. Every animal is slightly different, and then therefore it's pretty hard to prove that the therapy is doing over and over the same thing. And that's why we want to work on clearly defined, synthesized molecules and materials that over and over reproduce the results that the clinicians and the researchers intend to find.
What is the steps of doing this kind of research? What do you kind of need to, start with? How do you define the area you want to start with?
So when we started the project house back in 2018, we already had a strong background on similar materials or applications. So we have a healthcare business line that is active in the space since many years. And we have, for example, a biomaterial in the portfolio that is currently used for implants, for biodegradable implants. So instead of a titanium screw, you can use that material to produce a screw, fix a plate onto a bone, onto a broken bone, and then over a specific period of time, the material decomposes inside your body and doesn't leave any residues. And you save a second surgery to remove the screw and the plate again.
Wow, that's genius. Yeah, that's really cool.
So we have the experience on those materials, how to tune them, how to tune the properties in order to match the timeline of the implant, etc. Now we need to modify these materials for tissue engineering. Cells like it soft and cozy, so we have to make the material in different mechanical properties rather than a stiff implant material that should fix the bone. So that was a starting point. Then we have a strong business on amino acids and dipeptides, which is basically the food for the cells. And we are currently working on formulations and new components for these cell culture media as well, in order to prevent the animal-derived material.
So you also mentioned, this animal derived material. So that means there is a lot of animal testing involved in this whole issue.
So that's another aspect of the of tissue engineering. By producing more realistic and more reliable organoids, animal tests can be reduced. So now, as of today, if cosmetic industry, if chemical industry, if someone wants to introduce a new chemical, it has to be tested with regard to toxicity, for example, or sensitization. And a lot of that is done, and there's more and more regulations coming, which is good to reduce animal tests. But at the end, there's still some tests that cannot be done without animal tests. And we think that more realistic skin models, for example, will help to even further reduce the use of these animal tests. But it can also be used for the development of new drugs. If you imagine a liver being developed in the lab, you could use the efficacy of drugs on that liver and prevent animal tests again.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a very, very important aspect of all of this. What is your standpoint around the 3D engineering, around the 3D printing of organs, and is it possible to 3D print tissue, for instance?
Yeah, so this is called bioprinting, and it's a big field. It definitely will revolutionize how those organs in the future. So again, we are not there yet. We are still in a phase where even 2D structures are already challenging. Not to speak about 3D. Like a skin is built up in various layers. That can be, to a certain extent, simulated in the lab, but it still lacks the vascularization, which provides the blood flow and the nutrition to the cells. So we still need to work on getting there with the 3D models, but of course 3D printing would be a genius way to bring those things together. As soon as you can keep the cells alive in a 3D model and then know how to co-culture them and bring that together in a 3D printing process and that's, again, something where we as Evonik think we can contribute by this material competence that we have. And then on the other side, the healthcare and with the project house, now the competences that we set up around, or that we have set up around cell cultivation. And that's where we want to develop new materials also for bioprinting.
And let's go back to the discussion around Singapore. So being in Singapore, why would a company like Evonik choose to kind of not outsource, but put one of their important departments to Singapore? What is the reason for that?
So when we decided to start the project house tissue engineering, we had a look into where could we set it up. There were a couple of locations that we discussed. One of the things, when you look at regenerative medicine, it becomes more and more evident for the countries that suffer the most from the demographic change. People are getting older, chronic diseases are on the rise, like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, etc. And Asia is one of those regions that is struck, or that is struck and will be struck pretty hard by that demographic change. So regenerative medicine will grow strongly. Tissue engineering will grow strongly, and we believe that this will be strongest in Asia. So we wanted to be in Asia. And if you look at Singapore, it has for example, the best universities in the world.
Mm.
Nanyang Technology University and the National University of Singapore are among the top 10 engineering universities in the world.
Yeah.
So access to talents and access to know-how is crucial when you set up something like this in a field where you don't have the expertise. We are still a chemical company, so this was completely new to us. We knew that we rely on talents from the outside, and that was one of the reasons why we went to Singapore. The other one is an excellent network here. Singapore is a great environment for large companies, but also for startups to build up. We are located in the Biopolis area near the Buona Vista station. All the big companies are around there. The A-Star Institutes, which is kind of a German Fraunhofer, or at least comparable, they are there. So all the big institutes, all the big names are there, and that allows to network, to set up joint projects, and to exchange on that field. And
how about the war for talent and something like that? If there are so many big companies, a couple of great universities, then it must be feeling like being in Silicon Valley 10 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. You can, from interviews and from speaking to people, you can clearly see that there is a certain war for talents. However, we didn't have many issues finding an excellent team. It's just amazing what we got together, mainly from Singapore, but also some from abroad. So we have one who moved from Canada over to Singapore. We have a German colleague. We have so very diverse, and which is partly, I guess, because of this interesting and thrilling concept of a project house to build something new inside a big company. Sometimes I feel like being a startup founder, but with the support of a big corp. So I have an IT
that's really cool.
HR, procurement, everything. I have a pretty solid budget, and yet a complete freedom to set up something new, which is amazing.
That must be really fulfilling too, being in an environment that is still young and energetic, and in such a city like Singapore. And if you at Evonik manage to change the climate in Singapore, then just give me a call, because I love the city. But my temperature to survive must be below 26.
The past few days, so after Corona, or within coronavirus, we went into something called the circuit breaker, which was basically a lockdown. The workforce had been reduced to 15% all over the country.
Oh wow!
And it was pretty hard time. We were 2.5 months in circuit breaker, and then the circuit breaker ended a couple of weeks ago. But it was still no social contacts, not going to the office. And now since Friday, last Friday, we are allowed to go out and meet people, up to 5 people per day, for gathering. And as if the weather supports the government by telling us to stay at home, it's terrible weather since 1.5 weeks. It's raining all day long, which is pretty unusual in June. But Singaporeans are telling me it's super chill right now. It's aircon weather. It's 25 degrees.
Well done. Yeah. Well, how about your food? How's your food going? Look at mine.
Nice.
Very healthy.
Scrambled eggs.
Scrambled eggs, some feta cheese, and tomatoes. It's the best. And take some salt if you wish. It's the best breakfast, and really healthy. So I was kind of doing along your lines. So, you need some more time. You know, it always happens. I think it never happened in this show, or very rarely, that I wasn't done. But it happened even more rarely that some people were done before me.
and
we almost. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know whether you saw it. I even did a new batch of yogurt in the meantime.
Oh, well, yes, well done. I was like, what is that? That was the yogurt. Well, now we're nearing the end. And we always end on an uplifting and funny note with asking our guests for a joke. Do you have one? Yeah.
I have one. I didn't know it by heart, so I had to Google a bit. So the idea was to I was Googling for kitchen jokes. But in the kitchen. Why did the chef quit?
I don't know.
They cut his salary.
Oh, that's good. I like this one. Very good. They cut his salary. Awesome. And of course, I was looking for a scientist joke.
Okay.
So, how does a scientist freshen his breath?
No idea.
Of course, with experiments. I know, but these two jokes today was the first time where they were equally bad and therefore equally awesome.
So we call it even.
So we call it an awesome even. Alexander, I want to thank you so much for joining me and introducing us to your work, to the Evonik's work. And I'm really looking forward that your research advances. What do you think when is going to be the point where you say, this is a major breakthrough, now we have this shit done?
So actually, we are working currently on 2 launches of new products for that field. We hope that this happens towards the end of the year, beginning of next year.
Okay,
there
awesome.
will be the first products going into that field. And then in tissue engineering in general, I think it will be a gradual step, going step by step. It will be baby steps. It's far in the future, but we strongly believe in that field, and it's amazing to work in that field. If you read about the pain and the misery that those patients go through, and if we can contribute to that and relieve that, that would be just amazing. And we hope that step by step, gradually, we can help to improve that.
That is really cool. And I think we also need to mention before the end of this show that major breakthroughs need longer. So they don't work with these, company cycles of quarters and 16 to 24 months. They need longer, they need big teams, they need lots of expertise, and you grow also with the work, with the experiments you're doing. So, when we look back into the history of, for instance, some of the Nobel Prize research, it takes like 10, 15, 20 years for a team of 10, 15 people constantly working until they hit the breakthrough. So I'm really fascinated that you guys already have products or components that are going to come hit the market soon. But we need to really be calm down about these things. Maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, we come to the point where we can say, this is a 3D manufactured, tissue.
Yeah.
Don't break. Yeah.
Especially, I totally agree with what you said. And we try now with these early launches, we try to feed into the market and push the value chain. We are in a very early phase of the value chain, if you look at all the way to a patient. So we try to bring in new products where we believe in solutions in final products, and hope that this will pick up and allow all the way going to those patients.
Awesome. So guys, this was Alexander König from Evonik. He is the head of tissue engineering project and some of the people working for a better future to help patients with tissue problems. I find it really, really fascinating, Alexander, and thank you so much for joining me, and enjoy your healthy granolas.